My stomach dropped. 80% gone with 6 days left on the billing cycle. The heavy agentic run I would been shipping had eaten the whole plan and I still had work to do. Last Tuesday, I opened Claude Code and checked my usage for the week. The instinct when you hit that wall is the obvious one. Point the setup at a cheaper model. And that instinct is right because that one line, the endpoint, is exactly how Qwen plugs into the harness the same way Opus does. I will show you the config, the launcher, and the one fix that stops everyone in that order. By the end, you will have Qwen running inside the Claude Code harness the same way Opus does. Same folder, same skills, same chains, and your budget back without your judgment taking a hit. Quick note on where this fits. I have spent 20 years building AI systems back to the IBM Watson days, and the one thing that never changes is that the folder of plain English files you own outlives every launch like this one. So let us build it. Here is the part the 3 settings shelf never shows you. Does the drop-in actually work? Watch this. Same folder I use for everything on this channel, same skill files, same chain, same tools. Only thing that changed is the engine behind it, and there it goes, running my market research chain. See that line right there, where the sub-agent spawns and writes the competitor brief to disk? That is Qwen doing the job Opus would do on the exact same skill.md in the exact same folder. Not a benchmark chart, not a vendor promise. A real run on real work. The harness, that is just the tool wrapping around the model, is talking to Qwen the same way it talks to Opus. Same protocol, same skill.md files, same subagents firing. The folder does not care which engine is behind it. That is the drop-in promise, and it is real. Qwen Cloud actually ships a first-party Claude Code integration in their own docs, so this is not some hack. And the config that makes it happen is 5 lines, one of which I got wrong twice before it clicked. This is the whole thing. 5 lines in a file called settings.local.json, which sits in your projects.claude folder. Let me walk you through each one. Anthropic_base_URL. That is the web address your harness dials to reach the model. Think of it like a phone number. You are swapping the phone number from Anthropic's desk to Qwen's. One note here. For Qwen 3.8 specifically, you want the token plan endpoint or the pay-as-you-go endpoint. Pay-as-you-go is just what it sounds like. You pay only for what you use. Their coding plan only exposes the older 3.7 models, not 3.8. So if you pick the wrong plan, you will wonder why 3.8 is not showing up. The 2 endpoints that serve 3.8 are in their docs, and I will link them below. Now the part I got wrong on my first try. I mapped all 3 slots to the same Qwen model and wondered why my verify gate felt soft. The slots exist for a reason, and mapping them correctly is the whole trick. Claude Code has 3 of them internally. Opus does the heavy thinking, Sonnet handles the everyday work, and Haiku runs the fast cheap stuff. You are mapping each one to a Qwen model. Opus slot gets Qwen 3.8-max-preview. Sonnet gets Qwen 3.7-max and Haiku gets Qwen 3.6-flash. So you have got a full team on the cheaper engine, each one doing the same job it would do on Opus. Then the API keyline, which is how Qwen knows it is you and not some stranger who guessed the URL. One more line worth knowing. Their docs put the context window at about 983,000 tokens. The context window is how much the model can hold in its head at once. That is their number, not one I measured independently, so I am saying their docs put it at on purpose, big enough for any job I have thrown at it. Now the launcher. This is a tiny Python file I wrote. It sets those 5 lines for one process only. Then it runs Claude-P, which launches Claude Code in headless mode. Headless just means no visible window. The tool does the job, writes the files, and exits. Like a worker who comes in and does the job and leaves the result on your desk and goes home. The key word in that last sentence is one process. The launcher never touches your global settings. It sets the engine for this one worker, this one job. Your main session, the one you are steering from, stays on the model you trust. Screenshot this file. It is yours. The clean way to think about those 5 lines: if you want a whole project to run on Qwen, say a project you only ever open as a worker, drop them in that project settings.local.json, and every session you open there runs Qwen, exactly like Opus would. If you want a single Qwen worker from your main session, use the launcher which sets the same 5 lines for that one process only. The one place you do not put them is the project you steer and gate from. That desk stays on the model you trust. The config's clean, the launcher's ready, and then the first run slams the door in your face. And yes, I walked straight into it, felt very clever about my setup, hit run, got a flat 401. You set the config, you run the launcher, and you get a flat 401 error. Unauthorized, the raw API call works fine if you test it by itself, but the Claude Code command line fails. Here is why. When you log into Claude Code through Claude.ai, your browser hands it a temporary login pass called an auth token. That pass only works with Anthropic's own servers, and the command line, being helpful, sends that pass along to whatever endpoint you point it at. So when you point it at Qwen, Qwen gets a pass it does not recognize and slams the door. The fix is 3 lines: force your Qwen key through both auth channels. Set Anthropic _AUTH token to your Qwen key. Set Anthropic API key to the same key. Then clear the OAuth token to empty so the stale pass never sneaks in. Those 3 lines are in the launcher you just screenshotted. That is the 401 dead. One more gotcha, smaller but real. If Claude Code keeps asking you to log in through Anthropic even after you set the Qwen key, open the file called .claude.json in your home folder. Find the line that says has completed onboarding. Set it to true. That tells the tool you have already done the first run setup, so it skips the Anthropic login wall. If that line is not there, add it. Qwen's own docs mention this one. It is the kind of thing that will have you staring at a login screen for 20 minutes before you figure it out. But once the 401 is dead, something weirder shows up, and this is the part that made me laugh out loud the first time I saw it. I asked my Qwen worker who it was. Straight face, it told me I am Claude, made by Anthropic. I ran it again on Qwen 3.7 and the format was perfect, but it announced itself as Claude Sonnet 4.5. The harness system prompt wins over the model's own identity, dekta every time. And this is actually good news. It means the harness genuinely treats Qwen as the engine. The parity is real. The system prompt that shapes every answer does not know and does not care that the engine behind it changed. Same harness, same behavior. But it also means you can never verify a worker by asking it who it is. You verify it the way you would verify any new hire. You read the work blind with no labels on it. You check whether the output holds up. The behavior. That is your test. In my own blind pilot, 3 engines and 3 identical briefs and a sealed critic, the Qwen 3.8 clean post ranked first of 9 on voice. But here is the catch that flipped my whole week. All 3 engines, including the expensive ones, broke the output contract on longer jobs. One of them shipped work notes and rulers and headers when I would said output only the post, every single one, which means the rule is not trust the expensive one. The rule is test 1, boring real job blind. Trust your own read over any chart or any price tag. Okay, so Qwen runs the harness. The config works, the 401 is fixed, the identity thing is funny and also reassuring. But here is the question that decides whether this setup actually saves you anything or quietly costs you more. Here is the picture I want you to keep. A newspaper editor sits at a desk and makes the judgment calls. She decides what runs on the front page. She holds the gate. The wire service, that is the feed of outside reporting that fills the rest of the paper, can be any service. Swap the wire, the editor's desk does not move. You would never swap the editor to save on the wire. That is exactly how this works, and it is the one metaphor I am going to reuse because it is that clean. The session you steer from, the one where you run your verify gates and make the final calls, that is the editor. Keep that session on the model you trust. For a lot of us, that is Claude Opus or Claude Fable. The headless Qwen worker you just built, that is the wire service, it handles the draft lane and the volume research and the repetitive formatting. The jobs where good enough quality is the whole point. So you route the first draft of a newsletter to the Qwen worker and the editor trims it and checks the voice and approves it. You route the research aggregation to Qwen, and the editor decides what is worth keeping. That is the whole rule, and it is why the launcher sets the engine per process, not globally. The editor's desk never moves. Now the part where I tell you where this setup genuinely falls short. Nobody wants to hear this, but I would rather you know before you try it than find out at midnight on a real deliverable and blame me later. First, the compatibility layer is rough where agentic work pushes hardest. Qwen's own docs show the edges. There is no standard endpoint that lists which models are available, so you have to name the model yourself. The creativity setting has a floor at 0.6, so you cannot dial it lower for precise work. And the discipline slips on long chains, which is what my blind pilot showed. Second, a 20-step multi-hour chain on the Qwen worker is still unproven. That test is next, and I will publish it whether it passes or whether it face plants because that is the only honest way to do it. And third, per model routing inside one session is an open feature request, not a shipped button. You get the director and worker split by launching the worker as its own process, which is exactly what the launcher does. The rule is the same one every COM operator uses. The one boring real job test. Give the worker one real boring bounded job from your week. Read the output blind. Does it hold? If yes, add one more job. If no, keep that lane on the editor. Never trust a benchmark chart. Trust your own blind read. So here is where you landed. You started with a max plan and an instinct to swap the whole brain. You leave with the config that makes Qwen a drop-in engine in the same harness, the launcher that keeps the engine swap per process, the fix for the 401 that stops everyone, and a rule for which session runs which engine. Same folder and same skills and a conscious engine choice. Not a rebuild. A swap. The next launch, and there will be one, stops being a panic and becomes this exact routine. Run the one boring job test on whatever landed this week. Route the volume that passes to the cheaper engine and keep the editor at the desk where the real judgment lives. That is the whole move. And that Tuesday feeling of watching 80% vanish does not come back the same way once you know which jobs can leave and which ones cannot. So tell me in the comments, what is the first job you would point Qwen at, or where did it break when you tried this? I am in the comments and I answer everyone. If you hit the 401 or the identity weirdness, post it and I will unblock you. And if you want to build this alongside people figuring it out at the same pace, that is what Agent Skills Academy is for. It is free to join, nearly 1,000 builders inside pointing their own folders at whatever launched this week. The link's right here, https://www.school.com/agentskillsacademy/about.